Time is like a river made up of the events which happen, and a violent stream, for as soon as a thing has been seen, it is carried away, and another comes in its place, and this will be carried away as well. On Saturday, I got to talk to a multi-talented woman at her art opening at Gross McCleaf Gallery. Elizabeth Johnson, I knew you were a writer, but I guess I just did not know that you're also an amazing artist. How do you bifurcate yourself this way?
Well, actually, John, I have many more personalities besides painting and writing, but I'm just joking. But I don't think of them as separate so much. And you know that the writing I do is not fiction writing. I'm interviewing other artists. So I consider it background information or part of my education for being a painter. Since I've been writing for the Gross McCleaf project, we're trying to interview each artist that shows with the gallery at least once. That thing I've learned about interviewing artists is that almost any artist that I talk to, there's something really radically interesting about them that they do uniquely that I wouldn't have thought of unless I had to ask them questions and think up intelligent questions to ask them.
What would an intelligent question be for me to ask you?
Well, I'm going to leave that up to you, John.
No, that's not fair.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, I have an expert at asking questions, and she won't even ask herself a question. I have noticed certain artists whose work harkens back to early modernism, and I see that in yours. The way you warp space and have multiple focal points reminds me of the Cubists. How would you describe your paintings?
Multi-dimensional would probably be the best word. Cubism, definitely I'm influenced by because it's a breaking of Euclidean space and what we're used to rendering and thinking about rationally as parallel lines will always be parallel. Squares create boxes, all of that conceptual thinking that goes with realism, I'm resisting.
Why?
Distortion creates an entry point for imagination in our reality. It's an unknown, fuzzy area that makes things possible, where if you just painted reality straight on, you wouldn't have that freedom.
It's like you're doing a number of separate paintings within an overall painting.
The thing that I care about most is that there's always more than one choice. And that when I'm making a painting, I like to have maybe 5 to 8 zones of activity because I want to give the feeling that you can be existing in multiple places at one time. The way I build my paintings, I work on different sections, different days, maybe even different months. I work with one image at a time, and if it's very different and not unified with what I've already finished, I will let it stand and continue to add areas of interest rather than trying to unify and make those 2 areas or 3 areas make sense together. So I'm seeking to have a disjoint between the different zones. I pay attention to the general painting structure to make sure it works as a whole, but I really want things to work against each other.
I understand that your experiences as an undergraduate at Bard College can help explain your fascination with inhabiting different zones and identities.
I started out as a science major, so I have a lot of math and science background, and I wanted to be an environmental scientist. Even in the early 80s, the threat of global warming was part of our curriculum, and I remember feeling really overwhelmed about what I possibly could do as a single person in the sciences because I like to work on my own. So I got caught up in the art department. I really loved painting. I had always painted, and it just seemed natural to make the switch.
In Sharon Garby's excellent interview with you, an 80s art star came up, a guy who would juxtapose unrelated things like cartoons, porn stills, and the names of famous poets.
We were talking about my early exposure to David Sally at Bard College. There's a moment where a light bulb went off in my head. And as a 20-year-old, that's a big thing. I hated David Sally. The painting was in the Art in America, and I had a visceral negative reaction to his work. And what happened over the years, I grew to see that there was an opportunity for me to find how I could put unrelated things together and do something I liked. So it took a long 30 years.
I want to hear about your process. How do you come up with your undulating spatial effects?
Most often, I take a picture of just a part of a picture from the National Geographic or New York Times. Just a few details are all I need, and then I warp that with Photoshop.
Viewers, I'm the proud owner of Photoshop Elements, a stripped-down version of the real McCoy. This is my attempt to give you a pale imitation of the warping features that Elizabeth is talking about. You don't exhibit your Photoshop pictures. Do they look like your final paintings?
The painting definitely does diverge. The Photoshop images are source materials. Putting things together happens on the canvas.
I used to be a competitive swimmer, and I love Twice and Again. What's the source for that one?
Most likely that was a picture of an idyllic seaside gathering of people, but when I put it in a warp mode, it becomes more dangerous looking. And emotionally, that source is from my dreams, because I dream a lot about tsunamis, waves, floods, and so it's part of my emotional background.
I read an article today in The Guardian about this new physics model for explaining the universe. The idea is that there is no dark matter, but gravity makes space-time wobble like jello. Reading that made me think of your paintings.
Great, because that's what I look at too, is all of this very cutting edge science, talking about the universe as forming and reforming, never being at rest, that we can't really apply the rules that we use on Earth to what's going on in the universe.
You write and talk to all sorts of artists. Is there a favorite type of art that you like to look at?
I wouldn't say I favor a particular style, but I do favor artists that are trying hard and reaching for something that they don't quite understand yet.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I am really, really a fan of your paintings. They're beautiful.
Thanks, John. And likewise, I'm a big fan of your reportage also. What would we do without you?
I don't know, but probably have a happy life. Okay. All right. The Cost of Sleep, paintings by Elizabeth Johnson, will be on display at Gross McCleaf through March 30th, 2024. And you can see more of her work and read her writings by visiting her website, elizabethjohnsonart.com.